morning. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Olivier Campenon. I'm the chairman of the Cross-Channel Institute, and it's my great honor to welcome you for this presentation of our Barometer. This is the Franco-British Economic Relations Barometer, and that we're going to present today. And it's produced by the Cross-Channel Institute, which, as you might know, is the Franco-British Chamber think tank. And today we are actually be presenting the 7th edition of the Barometer. So here we are. You get it at the end of this presentation. And it is a unique tool, actually. It's obviously being used by the economists, but it's also being used by any business trading between the two countries, and primarily the members of the Franco-British Chamber. Just as an introduction, I'm thrilled to announce that for the first time ever, this is a premiere, the Franco-British relations trading in terms of combining goods and services have actually passed the £100 billion bar. So it's exactly 105 billion. So it's quite impressive. It's a plus 9% compared to last year in the world economy, which, as you may know, the world trade in 2023 went down by 2%. So this is a superb signal on the strength of the relationship between the two countries. And so I'm delighted to invite our two experts to join me on stage with Rebecca Rosic. Rebecca Rosic is an economic consultant and writer, please. And Fontana Tam was an economist at the HSBC. So with our two experts, we're actually going to go in more details on the results of this barometer. And starting with Rebecca, we're actually going to go through all of this 105 billions, which I actually should say 121 billion euros. Because I wanted to really mention the 100 billion was a nice threshold, but here we're actually going to talk in euros for today. So Rebecca, where are these 121 billion euros coming from?
Don't worry, I don't have 105 billion slides.
Or you may need a microphone.
Yes, I don't have. Is that the statement?
While we're switching on, I may ask for those who are online, which I greet, please feel free to ask any questions, and we'll make sure that we take them as we go at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, that works now. Okay, so I just wanted to start with the 121 billion euros of trade, which is very fitting. It's a record year in 2023, and it illustrates the privileged trading partnership for over 150 years between France and the UK. Last year, we celebrated the 150 years anniversary of the Franco-British Chamber, and this year we celebrate the 120th anniversary of the Entente Cordiale. So really, it's a good sign that trade is performing so strongly between the two countries. In fact, the 69 billion euros of exports from France to the UK rank France as the UK's 4th leading trading partner. The 52 billion euros of trade imports from the UK to France rank the UK as France's 7th largest trading partner after the US, Germany, China. So there really is a very strong relationship that has existed for a very long time. Moving on to the next slide, we look at the trends and how that has evolved over the last 5 years. We see that in between 2023 and 2022, Franco-British trade grew by 9%. So this was driven by both goods and services. France was up, trade from France to the UK was up by 12%, and from UK to France was up by 2%, increasing the overall trade balance in France's favour to 17 billion, which is up 87%.
This is in itself an unbelievable change compared to 2022.
Yes, that's more than double the 2020, almost double the 2022 trade balance. And I mean, typically France has had a trade surplus historically with the UK, but here we're seeing a real increase. If we look more closely at exchange of goods and services, and we look at the breakdown between the two, we can see that goods made up 75 billion of the trade and services, and services made up 46 billion. So it's roughly 3/5 goods and 2/5 services. The bilateral exchange of services grew by 18% to reach 46 billion, reflecting the strong growth in practically all the service sectors and in both directions. So the services exchange was particularly strong. The exchange of goods was up by 4%, which was mainly driven by France and machinery and transport equipment. The UK was down by 7%, but this was mainly due to a drop-off in energy trade.
When looking at these numbers, that's probably the most. Go back to the previous slide, please. Yeah, on that one, I mean, you can see that for quite some time, and the exchange of goods, the exports from the UK went down, and so how do we explain that? Well, clearly France was actually going up, and that does explain this acceleration of the imbalance. So, and where's that coming from?
Well, that's really coming from two sectors. If we look at the next slide on the movements of trade in goods, you can see that machinery and transport equipment, which is really the largest sector of trade between France and the UK, making up a quarter of all trade at 31 billion. So two different aspects. So you see France really booming, up 39%. Whereas the UK, even though it's still growing, was growing at a slower rate. The increase in the trade in machinery and transport equipment was largely due to a debottlenecking of supply, particularly for chips. And this drove a real strength in exports of transport equipment, cars, aeronautics, and that sector.
Okay, but so is this something that, well, we'll talk with Shantana to see if this is a one-off that happened in 23, or if we would expect that to continue. But it's but from the main machineries that have been sold,
that was a very big boost, especially in terms of French exports to the UK.
Okay.
And the other key feature that we see in 2023 was the normalization of energy trade. 2022 had seen a really exceptional, the energy crisis had led to an exceptional export to the UK at, especially for electricity, at very high prices. And France, for the first time, was obliged to import electricity from the UK, since normally it's an exporter. And so this, in 2023, we saw this reversal, and exports of electricity from France to the UK returned to more normalised levels. and you see France exports going up 99% and the UK going down.
So again, that refers to the exceptional situation back in 2022.
Yes,
At the time, France had to close down for maintenance some of the nuclear plants.
that's right.
And at that moment, we did import a lot of energy from the UK. And
Yeah.
that is going back to normal now. So,
Yeah.
so would you say 23 is actually a normalized year?
23, you see the normalization. Going forward into 24, you're likely to see a more balanced picture.
Okay. And I think here it says machinery and transport equipment. And what type of transport equipment? I think you talked about car, but is there any other types of transport that actually been exported from France to the UK?
It was cars, but also road vehicles. So that would be lorries, trucks, road vehicles. So got also machinery, but also aviation, planes and.
I think we clearly see the success of Airbus over the past months and years, so that's probably explains part of it, right? So what about services? I mean, services have always been the strength of the UK.
Yes.
But certainly it seems like France is picking up. So how do we explain that?
Well, there's been two big movements in terms of trade and services. And the first is in the business services, which is the largest service segment, and where the UK really is in the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that the UK has increased even further, even more strongly in 2023, with services up 31%. And services, which is really the big sector for the UK, represents now 46% of its exports or imports to France. So that is higher than its 5-year average and really illustrates the UK shift towards greater, the UK economy towards more service and less on the manufacturing side.
And if you allow me just a comment here for all of our members of the Franco-British Chamber, I mean, this is a great demonstration that if you are a British company of the real potential for development in France, and vice versa, that there's also a real potential for a French company to do actually business services in the UK. I think that trend is extremely positive and does represent the potential that exists between the two countries.
Yes, because we do see growth as well in the French on the French side. And technology segment, which saw extremely strong growth in 2022, is more or less stable in 2023.
But that's a bit more disappointing from the French side. I mean, do we have a French technological problem?
I think we saw very strong growth in France in 2022, and maybe it slips back a little bit in 2023, but the UK managed to continue growing in those segments, so it's pulling ahead. It's really lead is extending in the technology segment. But what really drove strong growth in French services in 2023 was the travel and tourism sector, which rebounded by 64% in 2023 to a record level of 8.6 billion, which highlights France's position as a leading tourist destination worldwide, but also very strong growth for the UK visitors into France, and that's both business and personal travel.
This is really impressive, and probably one of the highest growth that we've seen in all of these Barometer. It's 64%.
64%. And
do we have any more details?
8.6 billion euros of receipts is really significant growth, and in fact, even 27% up on 2019. So really, it's not just a return to normal, but a strong increase in that sector.
So France is attractive for tourism. Are we attractive for any other things?
Well, we're also attracted for investment,
Mhm.
and for the fifth consecutive year, for the fifth year running, France is ranked #1 in the EY Investment Attractiveness Survey, with top number of projects, 1,194 FDI projects. But the UK is also #1 in terms of the number of jobs created. So although it's #2 in terms of number of projects, seeing a growth in 2023 in terms of the number of projects, it's also the leading country in terms of the number of jobs created. France is not far behind with 40,000 new jobs created through the investment. And what we're seeing is that France is quoted as being the most attractive country in Europe for investing, especially in industrial sectors. In fact, it's leading positions in 11 out of 15 sectors, industrial sectors, such as automotive, aeronautics, logistics, pharmaceuticals, electronics. So it's really strong in new investments in these sectors. And the UK is leading in technology services. These sectors tend to generate more jobs, as it's implying people.
And I believe that the UK is also the #1 in terms of total investment as well. That's so it's quite interesting that we have actually, with France and the UK, the two leading countries in terms of attractiveness in Europe.
That's right. Yes.
And so that may also explain the dynamism that exists in the exchange between the two countries.
Yeah, it's also a good sign looking forward. If you see that the UK's strength in services is certainly going to be supported by these investments in new projects, and equally the French lead in manufacturing will be supported by the strong investments in these sectors too.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I mean, it's a lot of figures and numbers. As I said at the beginning, I mean, we'll get all of the details, more details on all of these figures. But I think it's probably time now to ask Shantana to give us some more highlights on the context and the perspectives. And starting with the context, I was saying in my opening remarks that I believe the global trade in 2023 went down by 2%-ish. Would you maybe give us some more explanations on that context? Because again, we are highlighting here the economic relationship between the two countries. It's always important to put that in the perspective of both Europe and the rest of the world.
Yes, sure. Good morning, everyone. So actually, indeed, the global trade contracted last year, both in volume and value terms. It was the third contraction since 2020, and it was mainly driven by goods, because in 2023 there was still the post-pandemic rotation in consumer spending from goods to services, because if you remember, at the start of the pandemic, during the lockdowns, people tend to consume goods rather than services, and so this trend reversed last year. There was some revenge spending in travel and leisure, etc. And so that's why the goods consumption was very weak at the global basis. And it leads companies to reduce their inventories, which weighed on the goods, on trading on goods. In Europe, you have also the impact of the higher cost of energy, because it has weighed on production in energy intensive sectors, also in industry like siderurgy, chemicals, pharmaceuticals. So it's something that has been very negative for industrial production in some sectors, and it has also had a negative impact on trade. France has not been spared by these negative factors, but as Rebecca mentioned, there has been also positive developments, especially on transport equipment, because you had this easing in supply disruption. the easing shortages on key components, especially chips, and so it has benefited to export of transport equipment, cars, but also aircraft, which was a big factor, a big driver in French exports. You had also this normalization in electricity production, which lead to some rebalancing, some improvement in energy trade surplus, trade balance, sorry. So all these factors explain why finally French trade has been a bit more resilient than in the rest of Europe because of this one-off.
And just, if I may, sorry for interrupting, and sometimes it's always easier to predict what just happened than predict what's happening. So are these results between the two countries, did they come as a surprise to you, or was that in your predictions already?
No, I think there are some elements that were predictable because clearly the rise in export in transport equipment was to be expected, and the rebalancing in energy balance was also expected because there was the return of normal for nuclear plants. For 2024, I think these trends can continue a bit, especially for the export of transport equipment, because if you look at the numbers, they are still far below the pre-pandemic levels, both in terms of production and export. So we have still room to catch up. Maybe the trend of recovery in electricity exports may slow a bit, but there is still a bit room to improve because actually, if you look at the situation of the nuclear plants, there are still around 15 nuclear plants out of 56 that are not fully operational. So there is still room to catch up. Probably on services, it's more on the trend of improvement in travel exports is probably coming to an end because clearly the trend of return of foreign travelers into France is starting to fade a bit. Maybe there can be some improvement from other regions, from Asia, for example. But clearly in Europe, I think the situation is almost normalized.
Okay, but just to highlight that point is the UK as the UK became a hub for foreign travelers to go through, and therefore is influencing this balance in a way.
It could be, but I think the most of the improvements was really the bilateral travel between both countries, and we see it's driven by tourism, but also by business trips, student trips, etc. So it's really broad. So, but I think now the trend should there is no much room to improve further.
Now, if I may, you used your expertise in something which is always difficult for behind all of these figures to put them in perspective, and I'm referring to the inflation. It's it requires your expertise to understand how the inflations, which has been up and down severally between the years, to actually read them well. And in terms of perspective, clearly we see the inflation going down. It went down already in 23, probably had an impact on the figures we've heard. I believe very recently the Banque de France was publishing projections on the GDP growth for France at below 1%. I haven't seen the numbers yet for the UK, probably in the same range. So is this something that, when you put that in perspective of 24, that again we have an effect of really slowing down these exchanges, or are you still positive on the trend?
No, I think it could be a positive factor because actually, when you have the inflation coming down, you have clearly an improvement in real wages because wage growth tend to slow down, but at a less extent, and so it should be a support for consumption. And we also expect that more structurally, the rotation from goods to services should also start to rebalance. And we already see some signs of that in the global trade data. because you can see that export from the economies like Taiwan or South Korea are starting to improve, and we know that they are bellwethers for global trade. And so we can expect some revival in trading in goods. And the fact that inflation is coming down should also support that trend, because we expect some recovering consumption in most of the developed economies. Maybe the negative factor could be investment, because investment is expected to remain weak in Europe this year because of the lag impact of higher interest rates. But even there are maybe some structural factors that could support investment. I'm thinking about, for example, the digital transition that is rather structural, and also the green transition, because it's also supported by the financing from Europe. So maybe investment should be sluggish, but we don't expect a collapse. So overall, the impact on global trade should be positive, and it should also be the case for the bilateral trade between France and UK.
This is very nice to hear. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. And I mean, I do repeat that we are an apolitical organization. We're not here to talk about politics, but clearly, with everything going on, all these elections, from an economic point of view, are we in a position today to predict the potential impact that it may have?
Well, it's quite difficult to do, but I would say that for France, we are clearly in a good structural trend, because we have some good signs, especially on the reindustrialization of the country. We have, as Rebecca mentioned, we are the most attractive country in the EY survey. And it's especially the case in the industrial sector, where really there are good signs, and probably it reflects the reforms of the current government, with the cuts in taxes, especially for tax on productions. You have the simplification and the reduction of red tape, and you have also all the incentive to produce in France, with, for example, the Green Industrial Bill. All this progress could be maybe put into question with a new government. We know that naturally as in his manifesto, this willingness to support production at the local level. So it's not necessarily a big shift compared to the current government. But the problem maybe is more about the reaction from markets, the potential tightening of financial conditions, because we know that the manifesto of National Rally is quite expansive on the fiscal side, and we have some doubts, some uncertainties on the capacity to finance these measures. And so, if there is a negative reaction from markets, it could lead to some break in the positive trend for the French economy.
Thank you. So the fundamentals are good. The question will be the consumptions and financing reaction. Excellent. Well, let's talk about something more positive. The Olympic Games. This is in less than 50 days now. Is that predicted as having a positive or negative impact on the trade balance for France? And we touched obviously on the travel and I mean, we've seen all types of numbers in terms of how many millions of people, we hope a lot, will come and be seeing the Olympic Games. How do you, all in all, how do you predict that may influence the trade?
On the Olympic Games, I think the impact is quite. It's not easy to answer, but if you look at the precedent of London in 2012. There is some substitution effects in terms of travel. So the net impact should not be that positive in terms of travel, because usually people that tend to come in France in normal times, they tend to push that to delay their travel. But maybe there could be a positive impact via the rise in investment in infrastructures, for example. It should lead to higher imports from building materials, from energy. And probably this impact is already visible in the data over the past few quarters, and should continue maybe ahead of the event. And I think it should be the positive impact for trade more than for travel.
Okay, that's thank you. That's nice to hear. There's one sector that has always been the strength a huge strength of the UK, and which obviously has actually led to a lot of discussions between the UK and Europe at the time of the Brexit, and I'm referring to the financial services. And there's been a lot of rebalancing between the two. And I think in the numbers that we've seen with Rebecca, still financial services in the UK are doing extremely well.
Yes.
So would you give us a bit more light on what you see happening and how you analyze it? Because we at a point in time, I think it was not that long time ago that rightly so. I mean, the French government was very pleased with the ability they had to attract a number of financial services on the Paris place. But when you look at the numbers, and I think Rebecca, you might have the numbers. It's
We still have
so 4.9 billion in UK compared to 2 billion-ish, 1.3 in France. So this is quite an imbalance still. So that's again says a lot for the strength of the UK. How is that evolving?
Yes, you're right. France has benefited to some extent from the exit of UK from the EU in attracting some jobs in the banking sector, because major banks have tended to expand their operations in Paris. But actually, the development has been limited, and it has been restricted to the banking sector. And looking at the overall numbers, it's true that the UK remains the top financial destination, the top financial market in Europe. So I don't think it will change. And looking at it, there seems to be some willingness from regulators from the UK and the EU to start to discuss again about improved cooperation in financial services. I think that the tensions have eased a bit, and so maybe it's a bit early to talk about an improving access, a better access for UK to European financial markets. But maybe there could be some agreements on better cooperation in some fields like stability, financial stability, the impact of AI on financial service or green finance. So I think that there are topics where there could be more cooperation, and it could be a support for bilateral trade in that sector.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask the last question so that you have time to prepare your questions. So any questions you may have to our two experts. You just touched on it, and it's obviously it is a hot topic these days. It is also when I'm not at the Franco-British Chamber, I managed to be a CEO of a company working in the legal industry, a publishing editor, and where we're spending a lot of time talking about AI and how AI is transforming the legal sector. How AI might actually impact the trade relationship between the two countries. Is it something where, because we've seen in technology, again, quite an imbalance in the services. AI is clearly, for the moment, more a battle between the two sides of the Atlantic, and with the big GAFAM on one side and Europe trying to catch up with some strength, hopefully. We've just had the AI Act that's been signed, and therefore all of these I guess trends on AI may impact the overall technology environment. How does that it may impact the relationship between, again, your view in between Europe and the US, and then between France and the UK?
Yes, I think it's a bit early in the processes to be very conclusive.
I agree.
Because we see that there is clearly an impact on global trade, but it's more from Asia, because you see that there is a large development in chips from economies that are dedicated to AI.
That's a fair point. We haven't touched on that. That's a very important point. So let's keep that, because the chips has been such a battle at the point in time, and did create some tension between obviously Asia and the Occidental world.
Yes, because there is some specializations. Only a few countries are specialized in the AI chips. So it's Taiwan, South Korea, and Malaysia, I think. But it's a big battle for the coming years. But returning to the impact for Europe, I think in France and UK, what we are seeing is more the development, the research and development, and the development of startups like Mistral in France. Maybe, for example, I see more France and UK as rival in that sector. Maybe there could be more cooperation in the future, but as we are still in the early phase of the development, probably there is no much cooperation so far. But obviously there is a lot of uncertainty. We think that AI should be a big source of opportunity for businesses, and maybe it could be a big factor for trade in the coming years. But yes, for the time being, it's a bit difficult to know how it will impact the economies and even the job market, because we are not sure about the net impact on jobs and the fact that it could create, but also destroy jobs. It's quite difficult to know now.
We're still waiting for European NVIDIA, knowing the capital increase. Let me now turn back to you if you have any questions or comments. We have a microphone so that people from who are online can actually hear us. Yes.
It's a question for Chantal. You mentioned that the fundamentals are there, that shouldn't be no big problems in 2025. Nevertheless, be more specific. Do you believe there will still be a growth in France, in UK, in Europe, and globally? And what size of type of growth that could be in before?
Yeah, our central scenario is still that the growth will remain what we actually in our current scenario we expect growth to be higher next year, because we expect that the consumption will continue to recover, and we expect that investment should be also stronger because the negative drag from higher interest rates should fade. The ECB cut its policy rate last week, and we expect 2 more rate cuts of 25 basis points by the end of the year. So if we are right, investment should start to be stronger. It's true that in France the housing market is still a bit sluggish, but we start to see some signs of revival in credit. So we think that the housing market should start to stabilize by the end of the year. The main risk is political, and it's true in France, but it's also true at the European level, because you have at the European elections you have this surge of right populist parties. We know that they tend to be more protectionist. They tend to be less favorable to the green transition, at least in terms of to the investment in green energy. And so maybe it's a risk for the outlook, but it's still a bit early to say that, because for the time being the centrist parties, which are the Social Democrats, the EPP and the Liberals, they still have the majority at the European Parliament. And for France, it's also a bit early to a conclusion, because we don't know what will happen after the elections. We could have a national rally government, but we could also have some parliament with some paralysis. So it's difficult to. And the UK, well, polls clearly point to a victory from the Labour Party, and clearly the manifesto of the Labour Party is relatively orthodox on an economic point of view, and we even think that there could be some positive elements in this, because the Labour Party advocates higher green investment, and it also wants the creation of a public clean energy company. The main problem for the next government will be the fiscal constraints in UK, which are also important. And we know that in the UK, political governments more respect the limits than in France, for example, where we tend to be a bit more. We are less strict, but it could be a factor that could limit the economic policy of the next government. But overall, we expect that the British growth should also pick up next year, because of the lower interest rates and also the rise in consumption.
What about China and the States?
Yeah, it's the other big risk on the global economic outlook is the trade tensions, because clearly we see already some signs of higher tensions because the US raised the tariffs recently on the selection of goods, around 18 billion of Chinese imports with electric vehicles, the solar panels and batteries. So far it's limited, so and we wait for the retaliation from China, which so far so that there is no big risk on the big spiral negative loop on global economic outlook. It could change with the US elections at the end of the year, obviously. So it's a risk that we keep in mind, but so far it's not our central scenario. We expect that both economies should continue to be relatively strong. In China, the big issue now is more the weakness of the property market, but authorities have adopted a lot of measures to revive the market, and we expect that there will be some stabilization by the end of the year. And more structurally, China should continue to benefit from the upgrade of the manufacturing sector and the investment also in the green energies, which is very strong in China.
That's nice to hear, because again this morning you may have heard in the news that there is all this debate on the electrical car manufactured out of China, and with the decision from the EU to overtax them and the potential response from the China authorities. So there's still a risk. I mean, when you listen to these news, I mean, there's still a risk of escalations of these.
Yes, it's a risk. And we expect some retaliation from China, probably on cognac, maybe on the premium cars. But
it's still
we have to. I think it's true that the tariffs announced by the EU were a bit higher than what we expected.
Yes.
But we don't think it could have an impact on the imports of electric vehicles for some constructors, but it's not completely. It should not prevent some imports from other constructors, like for example the BYD, which is very competitive. So we don't think it will be. We think that China will remain pragmatic, but of course it's a risk that we have to monitor.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this results? You've been crystal clear on all of these figures. I think time flies as usual. So let me thank on your behalf. Both panelists, thank you very much for your insight. Thank you very much for all the work, and I really encourage you to take the two versions. We actually have a version in English and one in French, and it's also available online on the Franco-British website. And with this, you will have all of the details of what has been presented today. Rebecca, Chantana, thank you very much.